Hi, this is Monique with Life with Hospice. This is episode number 8. This episode is going to be a little bit different than what some of the others have been. I kind of just want to have a heart-to-heart talk with all of you, people that are all about hospice and understand what it's about, and then those that don't. In my research with looking into what people need when it comes to hospice, I've come across a couple things that have been very upsetting to me. Being a hospice nurse for the last 6 years, I know how my practice is. I know how the other nurses that I work with, how their practice is. The patient's interests are completely what we are focused on. Their comfort, making sure the end of their life is the best that it can be. But some of the things that I've been reading have been breaking my heart. And I understand that some of that could be for different reasons. It could be because somebody has not accepted the terminal illness of their loved one and maybe they don't want hospice. I completely believe if somebody isn't ready for hospice, they shouldn't be in hospice. They should never sign that paperwork saying, sign me up. If there's families fighting about hospice, it does get kind of difficult in those situations because you've got some people in the family that understand hospice and want that family member's life to be the best that it can be. And then there's some people in that family that they don't want to lose that family member no matter what the cost. So, I understand that there are differences in what people are looking at when they have a family member with a terminal illness. But some of the things that I've been seeing online are very upsetting, especially to a hospice nurse or somebody who understands hospice and has a family member in it. I found a Facebook page called Murdered by Hospice, and I actually did some reading of what some of the people were saying. I didn't want to make comments because some of these people, you could tell, they completely, they had their mind made up. There was nothing that anybody could say that was going to change their mind. They may have had a bad experience, which, those do happen. I can't say that every journey in hospice is perfect, but a lot of what happens in hospice is exactly the way it's meant to happen. We're supposed to help that person not to pass away, but to pass away as they would have anyway, but to do it with comfort and dignity and not suffer. So a lot of what I've read is very, very upsetting. In Murdered by Hospice, I found people talking about how mixing medications has killed their loved one. I know in hospice, we use the least amount of medication that is needed to get the needed result for that patient, whether if it's shortness of breath, we give morphine for that, or we call it Roxanol, it's oral morphine. We use the lowest doses possible to get their breathing under control so it's a comfortable breath. Some people feel that if you're giving morphine and you're giving Ativan together, that was one of the things that I read, that caused the death of their family member, and that is just not true. Morphine is used for pain or shortness of breath. Ativan is used for anxiety, and together they help that person with their breathing and anxiety because, when you can't breathe very well, you have anxiety. So it helps with the anxiety, it helps with the air hunger, it relaxes the lungs to get a good breath in. Those two medications together work perfectly together. They don't kill together. And we also use very small amounts of both of these medications to get the desired effect with the patient. So together, these medications work well and do not hamper the patient's ability to breathe and do not create their death quicker than what they normally would. Another thing that I read about was starvation. Now, this is huge with hospice patients. I think that one of the reasons why they would feel this way is because they don't understand that as a person is transitioning through the dying process, the body is no longer able to process nutrition. It doesn't need to. Things are starting to shut down in the body, and it can no longer process. So any food that goes in, it just sits there. It doesn't work through the system because it can't anymore. So force feeding people or trying to get them to eat is just going to cause pain and uncomfortableness in the intestines and the stomach because it just can't pass through. So that's one thing that that people do. They try to force feed because they think that that's going to help them get stronger. But in all reality, it actually hurts them. And along those lines with feeding, as somebody also continues to transition, they're no longer hungry anymore because the body is starting to go through the dying process. When that happens at the beginning, you'll start noticing that somebody is starting to have trouble swallowing. They don't want to eat anymore. They have no appetite to eat. So what they want continues to slow down as time goes on, and they just have no desire to, because their body just cannot process what they're putting into them anymore. So, families can, as the appetite starts to slow down and the swallowing we start having issues with swallowing, certain things like puddings or applesauce or things that are easy to swallow, easy to digest, those are the foods that person should start taking near the end of life. Another thing that can happen with feeding as people start having trouble swallowing is aspiration. That food, as they're having trouble swallowing, will start going into the lungs. And that just opens up a whole nother can of worms when it comes to pneumonia, having all that food going into the lungs. Like, that's going to cause distress for your family member. So not feeding is not something that, hospice, just you come on hospice, you stop eating. No, that's not true. In fact, in hospice, we want people to have everything that they want. If we definitely want to give them things that are easy on the stomach, easy on the digestion. But if that family member all of a sudden just says, I want a hamburger, then they need a hamburger. They need a hamburger, or if they want a beer, they can have a beer, like whatever they want. This is the end of their life. They need to run it the way they want it to be. It's their life. It's their end of their life. So they need to do what they want to do. So if a family member is not hungry, there's a reason for that. They're not hungry because their body cannot process it effectively anymore. And as time goes on, that ability to process that food just gets less and less and less. So they're going to eat less and less. And then pretty soon they're not going to be able to swallow anymore. And that's all part of the normal process of dying. And I feel like a lot of people just, they don't understand. So they continue to want to force feed because they think it's going to make them stronger, but in all reality, they're hurting them, and they don't understand that. So I just wanted to touch on that. Another thing is fluids. Fluids, drinking near the end of life. Definitely try to, if they want something to drink, offer. If they want it, great. If they can swallow it, great. Sometimes as they start getting towards the end of life, like they would with food, they start aspirating fluids too. And all of this is the normal part of the dying process. So they're not going to be able to swallow it anymore. And then the body begins to start to dehydrate, which, and I know this sounds horrible, but as the normal process of dehydration starts, the body can have an easier time with the very end of life when it doesn't have a lot of fluid on board. And there are some families that, dehydration, they get so upset thinking that their loved one is getting dehydrated, but that is what will make a comfortable passing for that family member. I think I mentioned in one of the previous videos about when I was working in the hospital with a hospice patient. The family was so concerned on dehydration that they wanted fluids to be run on their family member because they felt like they were getting dehydrated, which again is all part of that natural process. Well, I tried to explain to them, like, when a person going through the dying process starts to have too much fluid on board, it starts shunting to the lungs. And when it does that, it starts filling up the lungs and it starts to drown the loved one. And I tried to explain that to the family several times. And they, at that point, did not care because in their minds, they were like, that is helping them. And they couldn't hear me. And that was okay. They couldn't hear me, but I ran those fluids even though I knew that that probably would not be the best thing for that patient, but it was the best thing for that family at that point, because if I hadn't done it for the rest of their lives, they would believe that maybe if I would have started fluids, that maybe their loved one would have lasted longer. Well, I did start the fluids, and then 24 hours later, the family was begging me to turn them off because as their mom was going through that dying process, all of that fluid that was going into her body was going straight to her lungs, and she was drowning in her own fluids. So it took that for that family to see that the body cannot process fluid anymore. And like urine shuts down, like the kidneys shut down, it can't get rid of the fluid, so it just builds up in the system, goes right to the lungs. Back in the day, they used to call that the death rattle. And it's because in the dying process, that's where the fluid goes. It just goes straight to the lungs and you can hear it. So not feeding, not giving fluids, giving medications for comfort, that is all part of the normal progression of going through the dying process. And in hospice, we understand what the body is going through during that time, whereas a lot of families don't. And part of our job is to educate on what doing these things to their loved one is going to do to them in the end. And most family members were able to get through. Sometimes we can't. We try. But this is, with everything that I have been reading, my heart breaks for the people that just can't seem to understand this process. And I know a lot of it is a block due to their mental anguish when it comes to their loved one. I completely understand. But again, part of my job as a hospice nurse is to educate and people don't go through this every day. They don't understand. In hospice, we do see this again and again, and we understand what people go through at the end of life. So part of this video today, I really just wanted to go over those couple things that I've been reading and just explain them in detail about exactly what's happening so more people will understand really what's happening to their loved ones at the end of life. And if you have any comments about anything that I've talked about, any stories that you've had in hospice that maybe it would be good for others to see, put them down in the comment section below so other people can read them also, and we can really get the talk about hospice out there and give everybody who needs it the education that they need to help their loved ones through the end of life. So if this video was beneficial to you, give it a thumbs up, and I will continue to release videos to try to get the hospice word out there. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.